Thank you, everyone, for having me do a little presentation. This presentation is it's a difficult one. It's the first one I've done probably in 3 years, and Valerie and I were talking in Hamilton, and I thought this is a great opportunity for me to share a little bit of my experience. I'm Andy Kerr. I'm the Director of Health, Safety, and Environment at Alectra Utilities. I've been in health and safety pretty much the last 20 to 25 years. I've come out of the trades group, and I'll talk a little bit about my history, where I've come from, and some of the investigations I've been involved with. But my career has been in the high voltage industry since I really finished college. I studied forestry many years ago and worked in the forestry sector. So I'll go through a little bit of the some of the high risk activities that I was involved with as a bit of a thrill seeker, which probably makes me fit pretty well as a health and safety professional. So, next slide, please. So the reason the driving through the pain, and this picture actually speaks volumes to me. I actually have it on my screensaver, my home computer. I traveled across Canada. I've traveled all over Ontario, doing health and safety consulting, investigating incidents and accidents in the high voltage industry. And I used to spend a lot of time looking through the windshield of my vehicle, whether I was working in the northwest corner up in Kenora, driving across from Winnipeg all the way back to Thunder Bay, if I was in the east side of Ontario, or whether I was flying to British Columbia, Vancouver, doing presentations for Electricity Today. Where I found the most pain is by myself, and this picture kind of speaks to a little bit of my journey. So next slide. So before I dive into when I hit the wall, and I talk about hitting the wall as a health and safety professional, um, I've worked. I'll start with a little bit of my hobbies. I grew up in a small town just outside of Owen Sound, between Owen Sound and Collingwood, in a little town called Meaford. Um, I studied forestry. I was always kind of that kid that was riding my bicycle, doing jumps and wheelies down the street. I had dirt bikes and mini bikes. I spent a bit of time cliff diving as I was coming through the trades many years ago up north, up in Sauble and Varney Speedway. I even raced stock cars for about 3 years, quads and dirt bikes as well. And I was also a power lifter for. I still am. I'm not. I wouldn't consider myself a power lifter anymore. Anything over 50, and it's just lifting weights to remain active. So I've always had a bit of a some will say a bit of a wild side, and a bit of a thrill seeker in my personal life. And with that said, I also, in my jobs, um, I've always worked in the high risk sector. One of my summer jobs, we put the roof on Scotia Plaza in downtown Toronto in the late 80s, 88, 89, and in the late 80s. We were working 660 feet up in the air, and the biggest issue on construction sites back then was wearing a hard hat, wasn't being tied off. Then I really leaned into the forestry side of the world, and I became an arborist, and I actually started a business doing line clearing for utilities up in Owen Sound. And as I was shaping that small business, I decided that might be more prosperous to become a lineman. So I moved to Cambridge in the 96, 97 to become a power line technician to work on the high voltage lines in Cambridge, North Dumfries. And then over the years, I got involved in health and safety. I got involved in teaching trades, from tower rescue to pole top rescue, bucket evac. And then after the 1998 ice storm, 2004, the safety association, called the Legacy Safety Association, was USA, and I went to work for USA as a health and safety specialist and a trainer. And that's kind of where I got involved in doing investigations and diving deep into electrical safety. You can click the next slide. So as I was saying, in 2004, 2005, I was the guy that would run to all the incidents that happened provincially. I wanted to know what happened. I wanted to understand from a rule book development perspective why are incidents happening, because you guys, you'll understand that in the high voltage industry, you don't get a second chance. You can't not do the work correctly, otherwise you don't come home. And we were reminded again this past weekend, if you've seen the news in the Oshawa Whitby location, there's another critical injury of a young person climbing a pole, and a line fell down, insulator broke, and to my understanding at this point, he's in the Sunnybrook Hospital with severe burns. So I was always really wanting to understand, how do people get hurt with electricity? And my health and safety role at Legacy USA, which became IHSA, the USA Electric Utility Safety Association, merged with the Infrastructure Health and Safety Association. And when we were working on the provincial rule book, I kind of had a huge interest in it, because the first rule book for the province of Ontario came out in 1914. And the reason that was, in 1914, we had a 50% mortality rate in our industry, meaning if I hired 10 high voltage electrical worker, 5 made it to retirement and 5 passed on. So I got very involved in the development of the rule book. I trained in the industry specific. I even did training and assistance with the Ministry of Labor on the regulators on the high voltage electrical safety. Like why are the rules written the way they're put into the rule book? Because it allows us to work on systems energized and live. And there's always that debate, why do you guys continue to work on equipment live? And the rationale is because the rules, the standards, the equipment allow it to be done safely. It's when we don't follow them. And I also got involved in national and international standard development. So I've been involved in CSA standard development on electrical safety, and on NFPA 70E standards, TC 78 standards. So I've been involved in the electrical safety world a long, long time. My other key role was investigating fatalities, critical injuries, work stoppages from the high voltage sector. And the good news, bad news is you end up getting very good at investigations. The bad news is you end up getting very good at investigations, and the same things come to light often about the rules and why people don't follow the rules. So I've worked with regulators on investigations. I've worked with employers and joint health and safety committees, and up until 2017, about 12 fatalities that I investigated, and multiple critical injuries with high voltage electrical safety. So giving you a little bit of a background, I was sort of the go-to guy for the province. I would referee arguments between employers and workers and unions about the rule book. I would referee discussions between regulators and investigations. So there was a bit of a background, and that kind of ties into a bit of my personality, because I bit of a thrill seeker as I've come through my career. Next slide. So I also presented on electrical safety, not just doing investigations, but I presented at the Legacy IAPA big conferences, the spring conferences, the regional conferences, and I've presented with IEEE throughout North America. Been over to Spain talking about electrical safety through translators. So I've been involved in keynote speaking, and often I would review fatalities, and I'd review an investigation of the facts of what we were finding. And I come back to this, I kind of was the go-to guy provincially. The Ministry of Labor inspectors would call randomly, and they go, "Hey, Andy, I've got a question for you. Here's the scenario. Where do the rules address this?" Or an employer, a utility would give me a call, and they say, "Hey, based on the high voltage electrical safety rules, here's our debate, here's our challenge." Safety professionals from across, not just Ontario, but across Canada would call, including workers and unions. So I've been around the block a fair bit with electrical safety. So you click the next slide. So the start to my journey, it happened in June of 2017. And there's a group in the province of Ontario. It's called the Alectra Utility Safety Professionals, and they meet 3 times a year, and they talk about incidents that are happening in the province. And it was my role to go from the Infrastructure Health and Safety Association, update that group of what's happening with the regulator, who's what's the regulator finding in their inspections, who's getting hurt, where are the challenges with the rules. And there happened to be a keynote speaker, and the gentleman's name was Brian Noller. He was an OPP officer, and he presented his experience with post-traumatic stress disorders and some of his battles and challenges that he had. So I went into this meeting and I heard Brian. He done a presentation in the morning, and it was like Brian spoke to me. And if you get an opportunity, I would encourage you to, if you look him up on either Facebook or on YouTube, he tells a very powerful message about PTSD, about his experience. So if you hit the next slide. So Brian talks about a motor vehicle accident that happened in Chatham. And he was a police officer, an OPP officer, and he was the first on scene. And he talks about he assisted in first aid, and as the individual that was in the minivan, it was laying on its side, and he was in there, and it dawned on him that it happened to be one of his university pals that was in this motor vehicle accident. And while he was doing first aid, while he was doing starting CPR and trying to get him out of the van, his buddy died. And he talked about how that impacted him. He talked about the old, the old mentality of, particularly in the male side of the police world, where, you just suck it up. This is part of the job. You have to accept it. So he maintained his role as an OPP officer, and he traveled around from different locations to different locations. But what he shared in the presentation was what he started to go through from an addiction, from an alcohol addiction. He talked about his anger. He talked about some of the high-risk behaviors he started to exhibit. And as I listened to Brian, he basically described my life to a T. He was describing me, but it was this OPP officer, of the challenges that I had been going through up until that point. So if you can hit the next slide. So he talked about how he began to break. He talked about his alcohol dependencies, his high-risk behaviors. And when I say high-risk behaviors, things like road rage, things like extreme anger towards people you have no idea. You don't even know who they are. Being, one minute you're calm and you're kind of collected, and the next minute you're losing your marbles, so to speak. So he talked about high-risk behavior, and he talked about all these factors, but he didn't realize that he was broken. His family knew there was an issue, but this is what I learned through my journey: is the people who know you best tends to be your family, and they know when there's a major issue. So in his mind, he didn't think he was broken. He just tried to kind of suck it up. He tried to, man on, so to speak, and try to police through what was transpiring in his life. So as he was presenting, I was sitting listening to Brian, and the whole time I'm thinking to myself, he just completely described my life to a T. And just, if you hit the next slide. So after he presented, there was watery eyes in the room. There's probably about 50 to 60 people in the provincial update for the electrical utility sector there. And then I had to get up and I had to present on all these critical injuries that I had been doing research on. I had to present on some of the root causes to what's happening in the utility sector. And I remember exactly the hotel that we were in. I remember the day like it was yesterday. And the whole time when I went up to do my presentation, I was almost like you froze me. I couldn't talk. I couldn't get through any of my material. And I've been a keynote speaker and presenting at conferences all over the place, big, small, 40, 50 people, 400 people, thousands of people. I don't very often get called stage fright. In fact, I've never in my life had stage fright, but this time it was different. It was, I just couldn't get past his story and what he was telling me about. So I got up, I got up to the podium to start my presentation, and I just stopped. So hit the next slide. Basically, I couldn't speak, I couldn't talk, I couldn't even I couldn't do anything. And I remember at the time, I I remember because I just started to cry. I just the tears came down. I couldn't say anything, and I apologize because it's tough. I was completely embarrassed. I was worried about my pride. I was worried about everything that I had done to that point in my career. I was kind of thinking everybody's going to think down of me. And at that moment, I knew I too was broken. It was, uh, it was really tough because every single investigation, every burn unit investigation, every family member that I had talked to over those years was coming out. And I just knew that there was a problem. So can you hit the next slide? So I left the presentation, and I hit the 402 in my truck. I called my wife, and she knew there was a major problem. I called the HR manager at work, and I'm like, man, what is wrong with me? I still, to this day, I still struggle. And I'm going to tell you guys that it's really difficult to talk about. And I think it's a problem with people with my personality style. And I don't know what makes me more upset, the fact that I couldn't get through the presentation, or that I'm up there blubbering my eyes out for the first time in my life. I couldn't get through a presentation, but I knew something was wrong. I knew there was a major problem. So as I was driving home, I called Diane, I called my wife, and I said, I don't know what's wrong with me. I said, I just can't stop crying. I called the HR manager at our safety association, and the poor lady, like, she had no idea that I had been going through any kind of these issues whatsoever, including my manager. My supervisor had no idea, because I was always laughing, joking. I was kind of the alpha man guy. So when I called and said, man, I can't present, I couldn't get through the material. I just bawled my eyes out. There's a problem with me. Can you hit the next slide there, Val? So you guys are going, oh, this guy who races cars and dirt bikes and climbs poles and puts the power back on in my town, he doesn't seem like an overly sensitive guy. And I'm normally not. I'm a safety guy. I had been involved in health and safety, and I was like, man, there is a problem. So from the outside, nobody knew in my professional world. And I'm going to get into that a little bit in a couple of slides ahead. But my wife and my family knew that I was headed for a roadblock. They knew because of my behavior up until that point, because it started about a year earlier. So I'm thinking to myself, what is going on? Like, why can't I get through this? I could get through every other presentation, and this one was just, I had had enough. And if you hit the next slide. So I started thinking about it, and I had put such an emphasis on who I am and what I am. And I started to realize, and it took some help, it took some therapy sessions, but I had to realize that, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I've got I'm a brother, I've got neighbors, I got friends. My mind was programmed constantly on being the top guy. I wanted to be that guy. I wanted to be fixing the problems of my industry, because I had such a huge pride. And I had forgot that with that, you also have to remember that you have family. you have friends, you have so many people that are watching out for you, and sometimes these people see the things that come forward. Just hit the next slide. So I started to redefine who I am as opposed to what I was, and I was so wrapped up in the fact that I was this electrical safety specialist. I was the number one, guy to go to when an incident occurred, whether it happened provincially or across Canada. All the things I've been in my life, I had this huge pride. And if you look at the slide, I put all the emphasis on the fact that I owned a business. I was a manager. I was a director. I'm this great electrical safety guy. I took a lot of pride in the training I used to do with trades. And in the trades, if you think of the line trade, one of the things that's hard for a lot of people to understand, and it's hard to like, even myself, I got into the trade because when bad weather or when really serious adverse effects are coming into town, everybody's hunkering down, but the high voltage guys are getting ready to go to work. And you end up with this. I don't know a whole lot about the alpha beta male, but it's this alpha male part of your mentality, and you forget that you're a dad. You forget you're a son. You forget about your family. You forget about your friends, and you start to push that aside, and you really lean in, to really what you are in your professional life. And that's a huge epiphany for me that I had to go. I gotta close that down once in a while because it can't be those things all times. And I learned to realize that with a bit of help as I was going through. So this is now getting into when I'm up against the wall. Okay, hit the next slide for me. So I was bringing awareness to the AUSP group meeting, and as I was starting to tell you guys earlier, um, I've investigated so many incidents, not just across Ontario, but also in the East Coast and the West Coast. And I've had families yelling at funerals at me on what I'm going to do to make the rules better, to make sure that things don't happen. I've had media people sneak in and try to buy dinner to try to get a scoop on a fatality that occurred. I've had colleagues, I've had tradespeople cry on your shoulder about what do we do to fix the problems. And the worst time was in 2017, just before I hit the wall. I was investigating a fatality in Newfoundland of a 29-year-old kid who was electrocuted building a power line. And I went into the to the grocery store to get a sandwich. They had a deli in the grocery store, and I had my electrical utility jacket on, one of the bright orange jackets, and a group of people started, kind of yelling at me that, I was there and one of their own was killed, and it was really, really impacting. So the things that I had gone through, the investigations I have gone through over my years, were people I knew. The utility industry in Ontario is very small. It represents a very small group of individuals. And in my career in teaching and training and doing presentations at different safety conferences, I have had probably every electrical tradesperson that works for power generation or utilities in one of my classrooms or presentations. And the problem that I was starting to face was the people that I knew were getting killed. And it was really, really bothering me. So if you hit the next slide. Burn units, interviewing parents, interviewing loved ones in burn units. Like I could go through presentations and bring the hardest of hardest tradespeople to tears, and here I am not being able to get through any of them. And literally, as it started, and you can tell now it still really bothers me today, but every tragic incident seemed to be rolling down my cheek in tears, and I couldn't figure out why. I was really, really stonewalled on what happened. So my update didn't go very well. I had to get someone to fill in. I actually had to send an email back. But if you hit the next slide, I couldn't let go of the events. So what I started to realize is, as I was doing presentations, as I was doing training, I was reliving the investigations over and over and over. So every electrical safety session that I would do, I would talk about an incident that occurred. Every presentation at a safety conference, I would talk about the learnings and the outcomes. And what would happen is I just relive them over and over and over in my head. Rule book argument. As I was flying back from Newfoundland, investigating a fatality in Newfoundland, I flew back and a large utility in the province wanted to argue with me about a rule that was in the rule book to which a 29-year-old kid had just been killed. So it really, I was trying always to defend the rule book. And there was argument after argument after argument about the rules. Why are they written? So as I was driving and as I was traveling around the province, I just couldn't shut down. I would constantly go through these scenarios and I would just randomly start crying. I would just, and I'm thinking to myself, man, like, what is wrong with me? And I never really put two and two together until Brian Noller shared his story. So my problem, as I said, guys, I would live over and over through training sessions with arguments and mile after mile as I was traveling around the province. I just, in my thoughts, they hit the next slide. So as I was saying, it was driving was awful. I would just blurt out, start crying. I spent a lot of time alone. I started to push the people who loved me away. I would spend a lot of time in my workshop. I'd spend a lot of time traveling. I worked more. I just, and one of the things that's difficult for an employer to see is when somebody is requesting to do more and more work because the workload's there. So they're like, hey, listen, if Andy wants to do the work, we'll make him busy. How it leaked out at home was pushing away. Things that you wouldn't get angry about, I would just lose my mind. I would little things with the kids around the yard. I wasn't a very good dad at that particular time. My personal world, everybody in my personal world knew that there was a problem. Now, I also want to say that I didn't get to the addiction point that was where I needed to, go in and dry out. I'm not, I don't drink a lot. I wasn't into drugs. But I'll tell you that an awful lot of people knew that there was something wrong with me who had known me my whole life. I had no way of shutting things off. I just couldn't shut them down, couldn't get them out of my mind. And as I was saying, I would go from event to event and then relive these things over and over. Just hit the next slide for me. Work got the best of me. Up until that day in June of 2017, nobody in my professional world had any idea I had any issue whatsoever. That was the day that I broke. I could always hold it together. My family got the worst. And that's kind of the hard part. I really would take it out at home. I took it out when people weren't watching. And what I mean by that is this: when you talk to your family members, you really have to appreciate your family because they definitely stand in there for you. But I'll tell you guys, my boss, my supervisor had no idea. He was completely blindsided. In fact, everybody in the workplace, because I was the go-to guy. I could always hold it together. But man, I'll tell you, when I came home, they knew there was a problem. And God forbid if you ever cut me off or slowed me down on the highway, because it came out in a fair bit of road rage and what I'll call some high risk behavior. And knowing that now, I've got a lot of things under control. But there are a lot of times that I wrestled with what was going on. Can you hit the next slide, please? So June, I have a typo in there. June 2017 was the wall. I had to change. I couldn't go on. And the other part that I don't know if as you guys as a group to talk about, but I went to my doctor, my general practitioner, and he really didn't know how to handle it. He wasn't sure who to send me to. So I was able to get into a clinical psychologist, and it was, just out of sheer luck that I was able to get in to see the psychologist, because she's booked for weeks and weeks and weeks ahead. But she happened to come back early from vacation. She was taking on appointments, and I started going to talk to her, and she was a huge help for me to put things in perspective and to how to slowly push these things aside, to not get involved. I also I haven't met so much in the last year, but I met up with some first responders, some police, some ambulance and firefighters, and we used to meet at the church across the road from where I lived, and we would meet. We would talk about, you know, PTSD. We would talk about the things that you know, what I'll call alpha males don't ever talk to with anyone else. And you have to sometimes be a bit vulnerable in order to see things, because it's really difficult. So I started this little group of no ones, and I just told people, I said, it doesn't matter who your name is, it doesn't matter, we're just here to talk to one another and share some experiences. And as we started to talk about it, the emergency services people struggle through a lot worse than what I had been struggling through. The investigations and incidents, and the structures that I had to climb, and washing off body parts and cleaning out where somebody has been seriously electrocuted or hurt really bad. Those guys deal with on a day-to-day basis, and I started to realize that those people need as much help as I, in fact, more help than I did. So we started this group of no ones. The clinical psychologist was really good. The medical, the GP, the doctors, I don't know why there isn't a better connection between your general practitioner and clinical psychologist for mental health. I'm not sure the pathway, but I was able to kind of push and go, listen, I need help. I just need to talk to somebody. I need to figure this out. And it was the clinical psychologist that helped me immensely with understanding PTSD and understanding how the compassionate mind and how the all the things kind of fit together. So that was my wall. If you hit the next slide. There's a lot of pride, and I'm a little embarrassed today. I don't feel so bad today, shedding a couple of tears, because it was quite a journey. I'm really I'm certainly not completely out the other side, but there's a lot of pride in what I'll call the trades that I come from. If you talk to steel workers, or if you talk to linemen, or you talk to forestry workers, or you talk to racers, they don't want to show they don't want to show vulnerability. I will try to understand this the rest of my life. It's the things that I struggle with. As I said, the psychologist was huge. She was a major help in trying to understand PTSD. Still relieved, but I started to then get worried, because there's still a stigma. And as I said earlier in my presentation, this is the first presentation that I've done since 2017, 2018. It's really, I wasn't sure how I was going to come through it, and I apologize. I do still get a little choked up, but I still ask the question, like, why me? It can't be somebody like me. Well, I've never had an issue like this in my whole life. And talking to the psychologist and talking to emergency service personnel, the best description was extreme overflow. And when I say extreme overflow, I mean thought overflow. I just couldn't shut down my thought process. I just relive it, go through it in my mind. It would be event after event after event. And I wasn't doing the things that are good for your brain. I started to get away from working out. My physical activity had gone down. I pushed away the family. I was really my own worst enemy, because I was afraid to deal with it. So there's a bit of a puzzle associated with it. So you hit the next slide for me, Val. But I learned who's at risk. In the world that I come from, and in what I'll call the high voltage electro safety side, top performers, the people who get things done at all cost, are sometimes our best actors. And I was that guy. Passionate and compassionate people, alpha personalities might come across as being, the big, tough, strapping, we'll get her all done, but they're as vulnerable as everyone else. And what I mean by extreme actors, you wouldn't have any idea all the way up until June that I even had a problem. As I said earlier, I could do a presentation that could bring you to tears about electrical incidents that happened. Yet I could soldier through talking about them, trying to gain those experiences. But after Brian did his presentation and he pretty much described to a T what I had been going through, I was a really, really good actor at work. Where I wasn't quite the best actor was driving on the 401 and dealing with my family. So when you talk about the risk factors, it's hard to put in a box who is the highest risk, but I'll share with you guys that it was me. It's, straight up my personality. Next slide. Val, keep an eye on my time too, so that I don't want to drag you guys through too long. So who knew about it? My supervisor manager hadn't a clue. They had no idea that I was battling through any of these emotions. And what I mean by that, like I was a diligent worker. I was always at work early. I always stayed late. And I didn't have any bouts of alcoholism. I didn't have any drug addiction, but I had a temper during road rage that was just second to none. That would scare, the hardest of hardest people. My wife knew, my kids knew to a T. Like I said, the motoring public would know, and people I never met. I remember being so angry driving on the 401 from the airport back, and I missed my son's graduation. And it was because I was investigating an incident in Sault Ste. Marie, and I was just so angry. And it was that was one of my first moments that I should have been able to pick up that I was having a problem, because I'm not a normally angry guy, but it was starting to come out in anger for sure, road rage, and then randomly crying. So people that didn't know about it, and this is a hard part, because when we start talking about the workplace, there are really good people, really good actors that we have that we're working with day in and day out that we haven't a clue. We don't have a clue what they're battling, what they're struggling through. Can you hit the next slide for me? As I said, I started to kind of remove from my friends and my family. My friend group got very, very small. I really kind of only hung on to one of my friends through that time frame. He's been a friend of mine since we were in kindergarten. But if you had asked him, he wouldn't have had a clue either. Definitely my family, my immediate family, my wife, my kids. I stopped doing the things I absolutely love to do. I stopped mountain biking. I stopped going to the gym. The anger was really bad. And the anger came out mostly in road rage and in stupid little things, like things around the house that would just lose my mind about. Becoming physically inactive was becoming a bigger problem. And one of the things that has helped me is fixing all of those things. The high risk behavior, I talk about road rage, the temptation of doing things that are a little crazier than other, and talking to people who have battled through this. Some of the group of nobodies that I meet with, they battle with alcohol and drug abuse constantly, because it's so hard to shut the mind off. And people who have a really good understanding of how alcohol and drugs affect the mind, it's that ability to shut the mind down, to put something else in place of how to deal with those issues. So there were some signs looking back, and like I said, the big one was the road rage, because all my life, that's why I raced cars, that's why I raced motorcycles, was I used to take that aggression out on the track. And now all of a sudden it was stupid little things were happening on the highways. Can you hit the next slide for me, Val? Thanks. So I asked myself, why talk about it? Well, no one had any idea in my professional world, except for that day at that AUSP group meeting. Everybody in the family knew I was headed for a wall, and they didn't know how to ask. We have to find ways to deal with mental health, because I don't know what the answer is other than sharing stories like that we do. And I've spent a lifetime sharing stories about electrical incidents. I don't know how we get in front of mental health. I'm not sure. I don't understand how people are predisposed to, to different risk factors. But it will help talking about it. And there is support. And that's the part that I kind of struggled with, because I didn't know where to turn to. the clinical psychologist she was the one that said, Andy, you got to find some people that are battling issues that you are, and you guys will be amazing sitting in a group together and just shooting the breeze about how the week went, how the month went, how the year went, and things that are bothering you. So talking about it definitely helps. And you know, I'm glad that you guys have invited me. I'm bumbling through it the best I can. So next slide for me. The challenge continues. I am not normal, never will be, but I'm back. I'm nowhere near perfect, but I've never met anyone who is. I have new ways to deal with, you know, with the whole anxiety and the whole the issues going through my head. I don't talk about them anymore. I don't relive them in training sessions. I've had to step away from that because that's one of the things that certainly brings it to light. There's a new generation coming in, and I see it with my kids. My kids are 19 and 20, 21. And I see a lot of struggles with the newer generation. They're not like the generation I came through. And I'll be honest with you guys. I'm in my 50s. I'm 54. I grew up in I'll call it the school of hard knocks, and I don't know if that's good or if that's bad, but we did an awful lot of holding things in, and you didn't show weakness, because if you talked about your feelings, you were too sensitive to do the trade. Well, now I had a conversation with two consultants yesterday that are dealing with an electrical incident, and we're going to have another conversation later this week, and we're just going to do it intuitively. It's a difficult to spot. It was hard to tell. People who know about your issues tend to be people who are closest to you in your family. Workplace is hard to spot. We got to take care of each other. The only way forward, guys, is getting help and talking about it. So, and this is where I struggled, is getting help. The call to the doctor was a tough call, because the doctor is about my age, and I said to him in tears, I said, Jeff, I just can't stop crying. And even he was like, well, what's wrong with you? And I said, well, I'm not hurt. And he goes, well, maybe you are. And that's what I mean. Like there was some powerful conversations with some interesting people along the journey. So my challenge continues. The next slide, please. Talking about mental health, it is difficult, but talking to you guys has been good, and I appreciate you guys. The hardest part was hard part is talking to your family when they know you're broken. I apologize, but it's easy to get up in front of a group of people who don't know you intimately and personally. But both of my kids and my wife were there, and they knew there was a problem. But continuing going forward, one foot in front of the other, it's still it will always be a journey for me. Next slide, please. So I shared my journey with you guys. As I said, it's not over. I still have to be really conscious. I am not the go-to guy anymore for investigations, because I just can't do it. It struggles. However, I stay involved. I stay involved as a support person to the people who are. I reach out to my regulator friends that struggle with the same things I do. I reach out to close personal friends that are police officers and emergency service personnel. Absolutely, guys. Use me as an example. You're going to find award-winning actors and actresses around the workplace, and you won't have a clue to when this seeps out. Taking care of each other, kind of keeping an eye on each other, and there is help. So that's a little bit of my journey, and my struggle will continue. If you can hit the next slide. So my conclusion is someone's beginning. I may not know each and every one of you guys, but I hope that this helps. I hope it helps a little bit with each of your journeys. There might be somebody sitting next to you putting an award-winning performance on in front of your very eyes, because that was me. Talking to each other, sessions that you guys are putting on. I'm so happy you guys, there's opportunities to talk about these sessions. I've been interviewed a couple of times with Canadian Occupational Health. There's a session out there. I'll send Val the link. I don't think it's on the last of the slide, but I'll get it to you guys. But you guys are always welcome to information. I'll also get you guys my contact if there's anything that I could ever help with. So, as I said, it's my journey might be someone else's very beginning. The next slide, please. And I just, I may have run a little long. Sorry about that, but thank you for listening to my journey, and I appreciate everything you guys. I'll hang online here for a little bit if I can answer any questions, or if anybody wants to, ask anything. The chalkboard's up.
Well, Andy, thanks so much for taking the time to share your story and share the lessons. And it's a reminder for us all, I think, that how things impact people can't help but impacting people, and to pause and recognize that and talk about it as we're going along. Hopefully, will like the sharing the pain hopefully makes it lighter for everyone, but also that I think your imagery of the acting and the best actor award, I think is also very powerful, that that we have to recognize that people can be in pain and doing, in fact, in some ways, not overcompensating, but that we can't see what's hidden below, and we need to remember to ask, how are you, and how are each of us faring, and whether having the same person do multiple investigations over and over again, how's that impacting, and how do we manage health and safety in that regard?
For sure. Yeah, and to that point is their legacy prior to 2016 and 15. There used to be a multiple approach to fatality investigation and critical injury investigation. The problem is those skill sets left the organization. So there used to be two people that would break down an incident at the end of the day and talk through it, and often you could get through. And it's kind of like, who's taking care of the caretakers, so to speak.
Yeah.
So no, I appreciate that.
I see lots of words of support in the chat, and thank you for your vulnerability and sharing your story, and sharing your experience will help others. I truly believe so.